So then we are back with more understanding from the time of the Second Tabernacle services. The scripture uses from the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of Yahweh, indicating then for us the understanding of the time of the end. So then, from the viewpoint of the Messiah and also Yirmiyahu, there are sections in the renewed covenant where we find ourselves studying then the continuation of the previous covenant, and the idea of a renewed, it's because of the time that it was laid waste. However, the word renew, it's not a new, but then the remembrance of the starting covenant with Abraham. Based then upon the scriptures and the section related with the restoration and the reduction, we find then the time of the autumn feast nearly coming. We have roughly 20 years without the time of reduction. And then studying the autumn feast, we find then the structure of the chapters from the first chapter until the 10th neatly organized, and then from the reading of the autumn feast starting with the 4th chapter, then comes the 7th chapter, then comes the 1st chapter from the 11th through the 20th verses, and then the 2nd and the 3rd chapters, then the 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. Those are then the foundation of the understanding of the autumn feast. However, on top of it, on top of these, a person might say, these columns, you find then the rest of the chapters from 11th until the 22nd, where then from these chapters must have other groups where we find mainly couple understandings from heaven and consequences in the earth. Those are always standard. From these chapters on top of the structure then comes the prophets. Obviously, there are areas in the transitional time where Shaliach Shaul, the ram of the Torah, was always making reference of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Then he was, in fact, quoting those scriptures, because when we read Yirmiyahu, then lots of areas of the autumn feast comes from Yirmiyahu. From the 60th until the 66th, we find lots of references regarding then the autumn feast. So with those, we have then to find the areas of then either the Hashatans related with the shofars, or then the Messiah related with the cups, and then those also related with the ramifications from the prophets. And there are sections on the writings, and then we can trace back until we land on the Torah. It is a very enormous work. But so far we have gone so far as understand at least the structure of the autumn feast. Have this in mind, there is no revelation. There is nothing revealed, but rather it was revealed before. Yahweh knew previously, and he simply indicated, and then autumn feast became known. We are simply reading what Yohanan had given us, not above, not below. So it's not truly a revelation, but autumn feast. The Messiah was simply indicating how it's going to play out the autumn feast. There is not a revelation, there is simply a completion. If you say there is a revelation of the autumn feast, you have to say there is then a revelation of the spring feast. It does not make any sense, because the spring feast does not have any kind of a revelation. Simply the prophets previously pointed out, such as then the 61st chapter of Yirmiyahu, pointing the Messiah for the spring feast, and there was no revelation. The autumn feast is similar. We simply rediscovered what Yohanan already had taught. But because some people, they were indoctrinated during the time of the deceit, then they find themselves so much influenced with the junky scripture they can't get out of it. So then, the autumn feast, from the viewpoint of the Messiah, we find ourselves during the time when Yahweh spent in the holy city, and he organized the entire scripture from the Torah, from the prophets, from the writings, and then the spring feast, the transitional time, and also the autumn feast. There is a section in autumn feast on the 8th chapter where we find then the angel and then a relation with the burning lamp. Burning lamp, we understand, is the atomic bomb. It's not going to be some sort of asteroid or any kind of space-related item. It is the bomb. Because then what comes after then is the consequence of what Nahashatan had decided via the sounding of the shofars. Have this in mind. The sound of the shofar is related with sin. Sin is always directed by Nahashatan, never Yahweh. Yahweh, however, he always then, at the end, during the time of the cups, then he simply lengthens or he extends the first sound of the shofar, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and until the sixth. So then it began understanding the way the development that take place. So then, during the time of a previous understanding of the atomic bomb, we find then those mountains burning. Those we understand are mountains of petroleum burning in the Middle East. The temperature is going to be extremely hot, but it's so hot that there are refineries over there that are going to simply explode. Piping bursting, and it's not going to be very nice. And then the coming of this petroleum into the sea and destroying the third part. Why? Because the Indian Ocean is related with it. If you take a map, you begin to understand, coming from the Gulf, huge gush of burning petroleum coming from the air, you can understand what goes on then the third part of the ocean. Huge amount of petroleum, and then obviously the creatures of the sea, they're going to die. But then, in terms of the third part of the ships related with the burning of this mountain, you find then it is related not with the third part of the ships of the world, but the third part of the ships of the area where you find then the contaminated water at. So you find then the 2/3 on the other side where you find in China. So truly indicates, absolutely without a doubt, the understanding of the scripture and where we are heading towards. So then when you begin to evaluate the movement of the waters of the oceans in the Indian Ocean, you can understand up to Singapore, and you understand Singapore is a very important port. There are thousands of ships around that area in a given time. So then you understand those ships coming through, and you also understand that China is going to be ahead of the Singapore in terms of the flow of ships, far beyond. By the time then the atomic blast takes place, then Singapore is much lower than China, because you understand the mathematics of it. Third part related with the Indian Ocean and the area where the third part of the oceans are going to die, then you can understand that 2/3 of the rest is going to be on the other side. And obviously we would give a section of these numbers dispersed amongst the other countries, but the main bulk coming from China is going to indicate the leadership of trade of the end of the world. This absolutely is a plain understanding where nations should in fact give preference of the Chinese system, because it's coming one way or the other. And not only this, later then After these burning mountains observed, and then the sea obviously contaminated, and we find the atomic blast, but then is related with the spring waters. This means land. It's going to land on land. Fresh water means land. Then you understand what it means then later when the atomic bomb is released, and then comes the actual vengeance. So the whole situation is lining up very perfectly, because then it starts with the climate change, and it goes so far where obviously the polar caps are going to be absolutely melted, because then the regulation of temperature won't be anymore, and then you can understand the temperature rising levels of then obviously bursting the refineries of the area. So then, let's say for instance, the scientists in 2007, they had predicted a certain rate of the melting of the ice. 5 years later, it is 60% more than what they thought. 5 years, 60%. You know what this means? Another 5 years is going to be 120, if not more. 5 short years, 60%. So if you then project another 5 years at a lower rate of the same as 120%, you can understand that the rate is extremely high. And we have roughly 20 years, and if you understand what this takes place year after year, the exponential understanding of it, not true exponential, but the nearly double, it's going to be a whole lot faster, the melting of the ice caps. And there is no fixing of the environment. This is what then is very interesting, because people are spending a lot of great deal in trying to understand the environment, trying to understand the global warming, and they can't fix it. It is truly a waste of time. What the Messiah expects from his people is the then understanding of the time of the end, and spending time in his word, spending time with his people, understanding the holy cities, pushing for the holy city in the land of Cush in Africa, where then is going to have the first holy city of the linking of the souls of the believers. People don't understand this area yet. In Hebrews you find coming near the nearing line and staying with the Messiah and being taken care of the soul. This topic is not yet explored a lot, but then it gives you the ins and outs of this section of the environment, because it can't be fixed. People coming together and trying to talk about it, it's truly a waste of time. 20 years roughly, and not a single understanding of trying to fix the environment. On the contrary, there is none of it. It only indicates when the autumn feast starts, and then previously a huge change in the environment. Unfixable, simply can't be fixed. So people are spending then a great deal in the equipment and the space, and then they want in 10 years of having more equipment and the space to measure it. It's truly a waste of time. We won't have this luxury anymore. Try to understand the times and the seasons we are during the time of the restoration and reduction from 09, where then the 1,000 years had ended, and we are going back to the truth for the final push. This truly is the final push. The rest of the prophecies are then coming, and some of them related are already in place. Some of them the Messiah himself said in the 2nd chapter of Autumn Feast. He spoke of it, and then Yahweh spoke of it. And then there are other prophets indicating already the preparation for the time of the end, where then this time can't be extended. So then, because of the heat, you can understand what's going to take place when those bursting places in the Middle East are going to start bursting and breaking. Very high temperatures, because Yahweh is speaking then of famine of great levels. The world at a time or at some point they're going to be able to deal with it during the time of the harmony for a short time, if we are obedient to what Yahweh is saying to us. But if we are not obedient, not only we're going to enjoy not as much harmony, yet nations are going to deal with the problems that they can't solve it, because they are trying to do on their own what Yahweh said for them not to do. So then when we read the 8th chapter, then you'll find Yohanan receiving those understandings, and then the sounding of the shofars. Those are sin related. The origin of sin and the originator of sin gave then the directives on how it's going to play by consequences. Yahweh, however, He prepares the scenario on how those consequences they take place. So then when you understand, first shofar then is extended as the cup. Second shofar, the extension is the second cup. And then the third shofar, the extension is the third cup. So then Nahashatan gives what he wants as far as consequences of sin. As they take place, Yahweh then controls the event, and then He lets. And then there is a relationship with the heaven and consequences of the earth. And related with the heaven, there is the spiritual situation of it, and relates with a dual understanding from the viewpoint of heaven and Nahashatans, and both of them then taking place in the earth. Then the rest of it is linked up with the other prophets, as we understand the 10th chapter, last 10 chapters, or 6 of them at least, of Yeshayahu gives you a lot of information of the Messiah then coming and doing his duty as then the spring feast, and then later the autumn feast, and even after then the earth is rebuilt. For instance, the 65th chapter and 66th chapter. There's a lot of information in it, and those are traceable back and forth from the Torah and also from the autumn feast. And those that have to be harmonized as a person would, in quote, navigate through those very easily, layer by layer, in distinct times. For instance, then Yeshayahu, then Yirmiyahu, and then the other prophets. Throughout those generations, those prophets were encouraging the people to return to the prophecies, return to those holy instructions, so then in the future they would understand. And Yahweh spoke many times, when the day comes, on that day when it comes. And then He's explained there is vengeance to come yet in the autumn feast. And the environment does not play with it. You can read from cover to cover, Yahweh is not interested in the environment. He knows this environment is condemned. It can't be fixed. What He expects from people is the obedience in hearing what His Son has to say, so then this age closes. And sin then is absolutely destroyed, so then later the earth is rebuilt. There is no sense for people trying to extend this planet further, but it won't. We have roughly 20 years. Read the scripture. He spent time with Samaritans, 5031, and was placed on a pole roughly a year later. So 5031, 2,000 years later, is 7031, we are in 7012. Gives us maximum of 20 years without reduction. When Yahweh then places the reduction, we might have maybe 12 years. And there is no time to play around with the environment. It simply won't be fixed. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.